Hello and welcome to the channel, everybody. And welcome to Hunt Showdown. If you're watching this, you're probably new to it, and you want a little bit of help that perhaps is more console specific. This video is not meant to replace Psycho Ghost's tips or 4FS's tips. Those are still very good resources, and I will link them in the description below. I highly recommend you check those videos out as well. What I wanted to do with this video was establish a standalone, here is a quick 10 tips that can get you at least up the learning curve a little bit faster if you decide to play Hunt Showdown on Xbox or PlayStation 4. And with that, let's get started. Tip number 1, there is a training mode. You can bring in any hunter you have with any loadout you want into training mode and experiment consequence free. I encourage you not only to shoot everything while you're in training mode, but also melee everything. Bring the different melee tools. There's a knife, there's knuckles, and there's a knuckle knife, and they all act a little bit differently. And you can bring them in and experiment on the AI and see what works and what doesn't. Speaking of the AI, I'm not going to go over every single different AI enemy that you can run into, because I think most of them are pretty straightforward, with two exceptions. Tip number 2, Immolators. Generally speaking, just be aware that if you shoot an immolator with regular ammo, they will explode, and you will have to land your follow-up kill shot before they close the distance on you if you don't want to be set on fire. There is an exception to this. If you carry poison ammo, which is pretty nice against AI, you can two-tap them, and it's actually relatively quiet. And by the way, don't stab the immolator. Just don't. Tip number 3, Hellhounds. Don't worry if the Hellhounds give you a lot of trouble. They give a lot of experienced players trouble as well. But generally speaking, you want to play them a little bit on the aggressive side. Go after them. If you wait for them to come to you, they're going to start doing their little doggy jukes, and next thing you know, you're running out of stamina, and you're going to have to panic shoot them. Tip number 4, adjust your settings. For the most part, everything you see here will look pretty familiar to you if you've adjusted your controls in any other console shooter, but there's a couple of oddballs, and it's on those oddballs that I'm going to focus on. Let's start at the very top, control scheme. I prefer Gunslinger. If you've played a lot of other console shooters, Gunslinger will probably feel the most comfortable to you immediately. I have seen a few people running the Hunter scheme, what's the difference between the two? I will show you. So in Gunslinger, your gun is always at hip fire level, and you can always just squeeze the trigger, and you will fire a few rounds. You have to hit the left trigger to aim down sights. This is pretty typical for just about every shooter. If you want something a little different in how Hunt was originally designed, and I did give this a shot, and I did try it. It was not my flavor, but perhaps you might enjoy it. Notice my gun is now at rest. So if I want to raise to hip fire, I have to press the left trigger to hip fire, and then I have to click in on the right thumbstick in order to actually aim down sights. What is the benefits that you get from doing this? There's 2 that I can think of. Number 1 advantage is that if you are clumsy like me and you maybe drop your controller, or you accidentally hit the right trigger while your gun is at rest, you do a melee instead of fire your gun. Firing your gun is allowed and can be heard across the entire map, and that will be talked about in a later section. But for now, just understand that this is preferable to be done by accident rather than that. The other advantage you get is that if you have Hunter and you are right next to a wall, your gun will not clip through it. If you are in Gunslinger, your gun is always up like that. And if someone is out here, they will be able to look, and they might see your gun poking out through the top. That is the benefit you get from Hunter versus Gunslinger. I mean, look, this is all sensitivity. I mean, what you see here, these are my actual controls. This is what I normally go in with. You might look, your mileage is going to vary here. So all I can say is just play with it until it feels good and comfortable to you. The other setting that I will talk about that might not necessarily be totally clear is turning extra strength. And you can read the description right there. Just when camera input is maxed out, any active sensitivity will be increased in order to make quick turns possible, while at the same time not compromising the ability to make fine aiming adjustments with lower input values. Personally, I found this, like, I think the default is much higher here. I had to turn this down because I had trouble. It felt weird to me. It might not necessarily feel weird to you, but like I said, I think the default was like 200. Right now I've got it at 51 and it feels pretty good. All that means is if you really crank your thumbstick to turn, if you really slam it, then the game is going to give you a little bit extra boost and you will turn just a little bit faster. I found it a little bit too jarring to use to aim. I really didn't like it. But again, play around, experiment, see what you like. Down here, the only other thing that I will mention is this right here. You notice I have aim assist turned off. I believe it's now off by default. I'm not 100% sure on that. Leave it off. Don't turn it on. Bullets have travel time in Hunt. If you have aim assist on and you're aiming at somebody at distance, when you fire the shot, if they are moving, the auto assist is actually going to ensure that you miss because it's snapping to the character. You don't need to be aiming at the character, you need to be aiming in front of them. Tip number 5, learn the spawn locations. It will take some time to get a feel for which spawn locations are a little bit more hotly contested than others, which spawn locations have better sight lines on others, but this website that you can see behind me, which I will link below, notice how they outline where all of them are. And again, you don't necessarily have to memorize them, but just take away that, generally speaking, there are about 5 spawn locations on each side of the map. There are no spawn locations in the middle, and they're all roughly evenly spaced out. Tip number 6, use the information that the clues give you in order to help you better predict where players are going to move. What does this mean? So I spawned at Cypress Huts. Let's assume for the moment that all of this, which is, blocked out because training purposes, let's assume that all that got blacked out as well with the first clue. What that means is, if I'm at Cypress Huts and I choose to then go to Crematorium, if there was another team up here at Blanchett and they got the first clue, and remember, they got the same information that I did with that first clue, and this team here now sees, the boss is not at Cypress, the boss is not at Lock Bay. If I want a second clue, I need to go to pitching. There is a higher chance that as I move from Cypress to pitching, that I could run into another team coming from my northwest from Blanchett Graves, because again, they got the same information that I did. Tip number 7, learn how to read a compound. What do I mean by this? If your starting compound was full of zombies and hives and all sorts of AI that you just had to completely trudge through in order just to get your first clue, and then you go to a second compound and you notice that the AI population is significantly lighter, that might be the first indication that another player or another team was there. Another thing that you can do when you get clues, and I will show you here, get clues, notice that if a clue has not been taken, it has a very textured center. After you take the clue, it now has, for lack of a better description, a black hole in the middle. So if you come up to a clue and it looks like that, someone's been there. Tip number 8, learn the soundscape. The sound design in Hunt is fantastic, and it is a huge part of figuring out where enemy players are so that either you can intercept them or you can plan an ambush. I'm going to talk a little bit about how loud things are, and I apologize. The edits here are going to be a little bit quick as I try to shorten it for length. Everything that you hear in-game that you do, an enemy player can also hear if they are close enough. Not everything is the same volume. I don't necessarily know how loud things are in terms of how many meters, but I'm going to speak in terms of if something can be heard inside the compound, right next to you, a compound away, etc. So first things first, gunshots. Gunshots can be heard across the map. So if I fire, it doesn't matter if I'm here and there's another player all the way over here. If I shoot my gun, that player heard it. With a little bit of experience, you will eventually be able to tell not only how far away the gun was, but you'll also have a pretty good idea of what type of gun was fired. Let's talk about some other noises. First thing I will point out, the poor horse. The poor horse. How loud is that horse? Let's irritate him. Make some noise, horsey. That horse is loud enough to be heard if you're in the same compound, but generally speaking, if you're a compound away, you're not going to hear the horse. They're just not that loud enough. Let's see. The dogs. If you set up and irritate these dogs or the chicken coop, right there, that will be loud enough to be heard from a compound away. So hunter and pitching, or a hunter and Davon Ranch, and possibly even the southern part of Blanchard Grays will hear all this racket. And another little tip for you here. If you bust the lantern right above it, and you can really do it with anything. It doesn't have to be with fuses. Or fusees, excuse me. You can do it with throwing knives. You can do it with anything. You can shoot them if you want, but again, shooting is, really loud. So generally speaking, if you don't want other players to know where you are, find something to throw. Generally speaking, enemies have 3 levels of noises here. They have their ambient noises, sounds that they make just, normally. Then they have an alerted noise where, something has their attention, but they're not actively fighting anything yet. And then they have their aggro noises. All 3 of those are generally able to be heard within the same compound. So, for example, right now, this zombie, you heard it? Excuse me. The chickens are being a little restless here. Not now, ladies. So that initial growl that you heard, if someone is in the same compound, they'll hear it. Even if I have Silent Killer, or if I have a Silenced Nagant or a crossbow, and I'm trying to silently work my way through, if they make that noise, they'll know you're there. One other thing I want to point out, notice that when you melee, you heard her breathe in, and then you have to be really close to hear the hunter breathe in. I do hope it's picking. Well, let me turn the sound up so you really hear it, because this is something that if you hear a hunter charging a melee, it's very useful. Well, I'll try again. Just that real quick. And then let me back it down so it doesn't blow your ears out. That huh is loud enough to be heard throughout pretty much the entire compound. You can take Silent Killer, and Silent Killer helps with that. There is some debate as far as whether, how useful is Silent Killer really, because remember, I just mentioned, you're sneaking up on zombies and whatnot, and if they make any aggro noises at all, they're going to hear the aggro noises. So even if they don't hear you swing, they could still hear you. Keep in mind that that really cuts through the audio. One other thing I do want to mention real quick as far as sound goes. There are 3 ways to move through Hunt. You can sprint. Sprinting is pretty loud and can be heard from fairly far away. Just walking is quieter, and you would have to be a little bit closer in order to hear it. And you can also crouch. Crouch walking is the quietest, but it's not completely quiet. Keep that in mind. I think a bad habit of a lot of new hunters is they tend to crouch walk too much. There are definitely times for it. There are times where you want to be sneaky, but don't crouch walk everywhere. Tip number 9, learn how to play to the strengths of your kit and to the weaknesses of your opponents. There are a lot of weapons in Hunt, and it's going to take some time before you learn all of them. But they all have their own unique sounds, and with a little bit of time, you're going to learn them. And I will show you one way that you may not know. Now, what I did was I just clicked on the right thumbstick, clicked in the right thumbstick on the store tab. And when you do that, it brings you to this little gallery. Now, in here, you can hit the A button, and you will hear the sound the gun makes when it's fired. But you can also zoom out a little bit. And you can hear what it sounds like at a distance. So, for example, if you know your opponent has a shotgun and you have a rifle, then expect him to try to close the distance on you, and you need to adjust your movement and your play style to counter. If and the flip side is also true. If you know your opponent, has a sniper rifle, then try to use your throwables and, maybe land the occasional pistol shot in order to buy you time to move up. One other thing I will mention, try not to have too much gear fear. Just because a weapon is expensive doesn't mean they just paid to win that round. You can absolutely drop someone running a Nitro Dulce with a Winfield C. It can happen. It has happened. I actually once killed an Aftermath with a machete. Unfortunately, it wasn't recorded, which is a bummer. But anyway, the moral of that story is, again, don't have gear fear. So tip number 10, the final tip. Don't let someone else tell you that there's only one way to have fun in this game. I've seen a number of other streamers that will talk bad about a certain weapon or a certain play style. And look, if you ask me what my play style is, the answer is I'm moody. Sometimes I like playing like a sweatlord. I'll take an expensive loadout and I'm going to go for the gauntlet every round. Sometimes I want to play like a sneaky weasel. And I've been known occasionally just to, run a solo farming run just to get some perks. There's nothing wrong with that, and you shouldn't feel bad about any of that. Use whatever weapon you want. Don't worry about if it's meta, whatever that is. I don't even personally. This is a subject for another video. Personally, I really don't feel like there is much of a meta on console. There's a pretty wide array of kits that I'm seeing, which is really nice. But don't worry about what the strongest guns are or whatnot. You can use the starter weapons in the game and have just as much success as you do some of the end game weapons. Don't let anybody convince you otherwise. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions at all, you can leave them in the comments, or you can ask me when I stream live on Twitch. I am currently streaming hunts every Friday night and the occasional Saturday, but I also stream on other nights. I stream on Mondays and Thursdays as well. Feel free to drop in, say hi, and ask whatever questions you like. Let's see. Also, I want to be really clear on something. I am not claiming to be the best hunt player in the world. I make mistakes just like everybody else. Sometimes my aim is terrible, sometimes gloriously so. But I do have some hunt highlight videos on my channel from console if you'd like to check them out. And also, if you'd like to check out the music that you're hearing, that is my music. You can find it on all the streaming services. And if you want to purchase it, it's available at nickmakesnoise.bandcamp.com. That's it for me. Bye, y'all.